Stranger Things has always been really good at implying depth without stopping to explain itself, don't you think? I mean, the show throws you into this world where monsters exist, secret labs run experiments on kids, and alternate dimensions sit right under a quiet Indiana town, and it trusts you to just keep up. But what a lot of people don't realize is that a huge chunk of that mystery gets filled in somewhere else. And what do I mean by that? I mean, how did I just find out that there is an entire comic series depicting the story with even more depth? Outside the show, the Stranger Things comics quietly explore alternate versions of the same story, moments that were cut, expanded, or reimagined entirely. So yeah, if you think you know Stranger Things, you might want to stick around for this one, because once we get into the comics and all of that, the story gets a lot stranger. 1. Will didn't just disappear, he fought back. One of the biggest myths the show quietly creates is that Will Byers just vanished. Like, he got unlucky, ran out of time, and the Upside Down swallowed him whole. Season 1 frames his disappearance as sudden and mysterious, almost passive. He runs from the Demogorgon, he hides in the shed, the lights flicker, and then he's gone. End of story. But the comics, like I mentioned, they rewrite that moment. In Stranger Things: The Other Side, Will doesn't go quietly at all. He does exactly what a scared 12-year-old who's spent years playing Dungeons & Dragons would do. He fights back. When the Demogorgon corners him in the shed, Will actually manages to load the shotgun and fire it straight at the creature, yelling "Fireball!" as he pulls the trigger. It's such a small detail, but it changes everything. This isn't a helpless kid being taken, this is Will trying to survive. And here's where it gets crazy. The shot, it actually works. The Demogorgon gets blasted in the face, but the recoil knocks Will backward, slamming him into the wall of the shed, and instead of just hitting the wood, he falls straight through a tear into the Upside Down. The irony here is brutal. Will ends up trapped in the Upside Down, while the injured Demogorgon is left behind in the real world, probably just as confused as he is. Exhausted, terrified, and not fully understanding what just happened, Will stumbles back into his house, or at least what he thinks is his house, and he collapses from sheer shock. But it's only when he wakes up that the horror really sets in. Everything looks familiar, but it's wrong. The air is dead, the colors are gone, the world feels like a bad copy of home, and that's when Will realizes he didn't escape at all. From there, the comics does something the show never really had time to do. It stays with Will. We see how he survives alone in the Upside Down, how he moves through it, and how he mentally copes. His inner narration constantly reframes what's happening using D&D logic. The Upside Down becomes a hostile campaign. The Demogorgon is a monster with rules. Survival means strategy, hiding, and not panicking. It's heartbreaking, but it also makes Will feel far more active and resilient than the show ever lets on. And guys, one of the most chilling moments comes when Will realizes just how close he is to help and how unreachable it is. As he wanders through the Upside Down version of Mirkwood, he can actually hear the search parties calling his name. His mom, Hopper, his friends, they're right there, but separated by this invisible wall he can't cross. He screams and runs towards their voices, but nothing happens. He's not lost, he's trapped. He exists like a ghost layered over the real world, present but completely unseen. The whole scene just gives an emotional depth to Will's character and his resilience in going through all of that as a kid, alone in another dimension. And it's a shame that the show just completely skipped it. That's when Will decides he needs to somehow get through to them. Remember how Joyce received eerie phone calls with panicked breathing and whispering ending in electric shocks and burned out phones? Yeah, while it's implied in the show but never explained how, the comic reveals that it was really Will. Turns out in the Upside Down, Will had retrieved his radio and somehow it connected him to the house phone. That's how Will was calling Joyce. He wasn't somehow reaching across dimensions with psychic ability, he was literally on the radio the whole time, desperately trying to make contact through whatever thin signal could get through. Then comes the most important reveal of all. At one point, Will sees someone else in the Upside Down. For just a moment, he catches a glimpse of Eleven, flickering ghost-like and terrified. He desperately calls out to her, but just like that, she vanishes. That single scene answers a massive unanswered question from the show. How did Eleven know Will was in the Upside Down in the first place? The comics explained that when Eleven opened the Mother Gate on November 6, 1983, she didn't just unleash the Demogorgon. She was briefly thrown into the Upside Down herself before escaping back into the real world through another opening. During that overlap, her consciousness crossed paths with Will's. That's how she knew. That's how she recognized his face from a picture in Mike's basement. Not because of some vague psychic intuition, she had actually seen him there. The show skips over all of this and asks you to accept it on faith. The comics, they don't. They slow down. They fill the gaps and turn Will's disappearance from a plot device into a full survival story. Instead of a helpless kid who vanished, we get a kid who fought, adapted, endured, and stayed alive long enough to be found. And honestly, it makes Will Byers one of the strongest characters in the entire story. Number 2. Bob's final gift was a whole adventure. One of the things the show never really slows down for is Bob Newby. He dies a hero, everyone's devastated for about 5 minutes, and then the story just moves on. The Mind Flayer ramps up, Hawkins' lab gets worse, and Bob slowly turns into a memory instead of a presence. You get that one drawing on the fridge, Bob Newby superhero, and that's kind of it. But the comics, my friends, no, they were not okay with that. Stranger Things, The Tomb of Ibwen, is entirely about what the show skips. Will actually grieving Bob. And not in a quick background way either. The comic treats Bob's death like something that needs time to process and not just a sad event that motivates the next plot beat. The story starts with Will finding a map that Bob left behind, and instantly you can tell what this is meant to be. It's a full-on treasure quest, straight out of the Goonies. That's not accidental either. Bob was played by Sean Austin, who literally was Mikey in the Goonies, so the parallel is kind of perfect. Bob doesn't leave Will a speech or a letter, he leaves him an adventure. Will heads out alone at first, clearly not thinking straight. We see how he's struggling to accept that Bob's gone, and going on this adventure left by Bob is his way of coping with it. And of course, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas realize what's happening and go after him. To make things more dangerous, a massive winter storm hits Hawkins, knocking out power and cutting off the adults. Not that the gang wanted to worry Will's mom over this anyway. Suddenly, this emotional journey turns into a real survival situation. The only adult who is able to help is Mr. Clark, who stays in contact with the kids over walkie-talkie and eventually sets out to find them. It's a really nice touch. Another teacher, another father figure stepping in where Bob can't anymore. The destination of the quest is the Tomb of Ibwen, which once you notice it hits you right in the chest. Ibwen is just newbies spelled backwards. The whole adventure is Bob's final gift. Not treasure, not answers, just a way for Will to do something with his grief instead of carrying it alone. That's the big difference between the comic and the show. The show treats Bob's death as a tragic moment that pushes the story forward. The comic treats it like an emotional wound that needs closure. Number 3, the comic that made 6 matter. This is where the comics and the show don't just disagree on details, they disagree on who the lab kids even are. If you only watched the show, Hawkins' lab is basically framed as a closed experiment. All the kids are variations of the same thing. Same powers, same origin, same fate. Henry is the source, Brenner is the handler, and everyone else is just a step along the way towards 11. The Hawkins lab massacre wipes the slate clean, and the story, it moves on. But the 6 comic tells a completely different story, one that's deeper and honestly a lot more unsettling. Allow me to explain it for you. In the comics, Subject 6 isn't a background number or a generic psychic, she's Francine. She's got a life before the lab. She has relationships, agency, and most importantly, a power that doesn't look like everyone else's. She can see fragments of possible futures, and that power is what pulls her into Hawkins' lab in the first place. What's really important here is that Francine doesn't start as a child who's kidnapped or raised in a facility, she's recruited. She willingly enters the program because she wants answers, and because someone she is romantically involved with and naturally trusts, Ricky, convinces her that Brenner can help her. Now, Ricky turns out to be subject number 3 and apparently has the power to manipulate other people's emotions, so I'm not so sure about the willingly part, but that alone already creates a massive tonal difference. The lab isn't just a prison yet, it's a lie, a promise, a slow trap. As Francine's visions grow stronger, they also grow darker. Her ability starts feeling less like a power and more like a curse. She starts having visions of monsters, violence, and disasters that she can't fully explain yet. And over time, she realizes something horrifying. The lab isn't trying to prevent these futures. It's actively walking towards them. Brenner doesn't deny what she's seeing, he reframes it. He minimizes it. He tells her it's necessary. That tension drives the entire 6 series. Francine isn't rebuilding because she's angry or violent. She's rebelling because she knows what's coming, and she knows that staying means letting it happen. The The escape attempt at the end of the series isn't chaotic or impulsive, it's tragic and deliberate. Francine has already seen how it goes. She knows Ricky gets shot by a guard during the escape. She knows someone has to stay behind, and when the moment comes, she chooses to be that person. She sacrifices herself so others can live, fully aware that by doing so, she's locking the future into place. Her death isn't a shock moment, it's a conclusion. Now compare that to what the show does. Despite failing in the timeline later on, Season 4 casually reintroduces 6, not once but twice. First as an offhand reference, Lessons with 6, and then when Dr. Brenner calls the subjects forward to challenge 2 in a blindfolded telekinetic battle. The first challenger, a young man called 6, who bears literally no resemblance to the red-haired teen of the comics.
2. 6. I don't want you to approach this any differently than one of our tests.
Different gender, different age, different power, different everything, and of course, completely ignoring the fact that according to the comics, 6 was supposed to be dead by now. That decision doesn't just overwrite a character, it deletes a deeply meaningful and tragic storyline. In the comics, each test subject is unique, different abilities, different backgrounds, different reasons for being there. Some are taken, some arrive willingly, some resist, some believe. Project Indigo feels messy and experimental, like Brenner is throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks. In the show, all of that complexity is flattened. Season 4 implies the children's abilities originate from Henry himself, meaning the lab kids aren't individuals with rare mutations or unexplained gifts. They're extensions of a single source, copies or echoes, if you will. That shift retroactively drains meaning from characters like 6. Francine and her powers aren't just gone, they can't exist anymore under the show's rules, which is why this retcon hits so hard. The comics didn't just give 6 a story, they gave her a purpose, and Season 4 quietly erased both. And once 6's story collapses, the future she helped create, it collapses with it. 4. Into the Fire gave the test subjects a future. The show didn't. What makes the reimagination of the character 6 hurt even more is that her story wasn't meant to end with her. Y'all, 6 was the beginning of something bigger. Alright, so Into the Fire takes place years later, long after the escape attempt, and instead of asking what happened in the lab, it asks something much harder. What happens after you survive it? We learn that Ricky, Subject 3, is alive, and so is Marcy, Subject 9.5, who never had powers at all but was the twin sister of Jamie, Subject 9. A flashback shows that the two sisters actually ended up at the lab after they lost their family in a tragic fire, which was actually caused by 9, Jamie herself. Jamie learned she had pyrokinetic abilities, which basically means she could throw fireballs, pretty cool, kind of, and come to the lab to explore the full potential of her powers, while her powerless sister tagged along because she had nowhere else to go. And that detail, it matters. The comics are very intentional about showing that Project Indigo wasn't just about harvesting abilities, it destroyed everyone it touched, even those without powers. Back in Into the Fire, Ricky is older now, and naturally he's carrying guilt, not just survivor's guilt, but responsibility. Francine died so he could escape, and he has never really outrun that fact. But instead of hiding, he starts searching, looking for other test subjects who might still be out there now that Hawkins' lab is closed. This is where Into the Fire completely diverges from the show's philosophy. In the comics, the lab kids don't just vanish into history. At one point in 6, the other kids watched as Jamie, Subject 9, performed a test. She ended up losing control and was sent to the facility's hospital, where she remained in a coma. It's implied here that she had no chance of waking up, which was why the rest of the group left her behind when they tried to escape. And then there's Callie, another subject who escaped the lab. The show treats 8 as a narrative detour, a side episode really, something 11 grows out of. In the episode The Lost Sister, we see that Callie has formed a ragtag group, and when she reunites with 11, she tries to convince her in her journey of revenge.
Everyone you see here was in some way responsible for what happened to us.
Kill them? They're criminals. We simply make them pay for their crimes.
But Elle eventually leaves her behind when she remembers that her friends need her back in Hawkins. The comics treat Callie as a part of something larger. In Into the Fire, Callie reconnects with Ricky and Marcy, and while still angry, still damaged, she's also informed. She knows things. She's the one who helps Ricky and Marcy uncover the truth that Jamie is still alive. She reveals that Jamie didn't die in the lab hospital like everyone assumed. She's been kept alive, heavily sedated, her pyrokinetic abilities chemically suppressed. Her twin sister Marcy had spent years believing she lost her forever, only to discover the truth far too late. Together, these characters form something close to a fractured family. Not a superhero team, not a rebellion, just people trying to reclaim pieces of themselves that were stolen before they were old enough to understand what was happening. This is the future the comics were building towards, a world where Project Indigo failed to erase its mistakes. But Season 4 eliminates that future entirely. By revealing that most of the lab kids were killed in '79 and reframing their existence as extensions of Henry's power, the show collapses the entire expanded universe into a single line of causality. 11 becomes the exception, Callie becomes the anomaly, everyone else becomes disposable. That's the real loss here. The show simplifies the lab to strengthen Vecna's origin story. The comics complicate it to explore trauma, connections, and survival. 5. Dungeons & Dragons is the real origin story. One of the biggest things the show kind of glosses over is how this group even became a group in the first place. We're introduced to them already as best friends, already riding bikes together, already deep into D&D, and that works for TV, I get it, but the comics actually stop and ask a much more interesting question. Why did this game matter so much to them? The Stranger Things and Dungeons & Dragons comic rewinds all the way back to 1980 before the Upside Down, before Hawkins' lab, before anything supernatural ever touches their lives. And what you see right away is that D&D isn't just a hobby, it's the thing that pulls them together. Mike and Lucas first stumble onto the game almost by accident, ducking into a bookstore to escape bullies. They're drawn in by the miniatures, the monsters, the idea of strategy and imagination. It's alluring to them. When they bring it to Will, it isn't about dragons or spells yet. It's about having something that feels bigger than the world they're stuck in. For God's sakes, they live in Indiana. Everybody wants to leave there. In the comic, though, it really leans into these things. These kids are broke, they're bullied, they're powerless in every way that matters. So they scrape together some romance novels from Joyce's bookshelf, drag them through the woods into a wagon, and literally beg the shopkeeper to trade them in for D&D books. And when the shopkeeper finally gives in, it's not because the old books were worth something, it's because Mike explains that they're already fighting battles of their own and just want to feel like heroes for once. And that's the heart of it. The next morning at school, the trio talk about the game and catch the attention of a boy named Dustin during lunch, who explains the possibility of rolling a 10 or higher on a 2d6. Noticing how good he is at math, Mike invites Dustin to join their party, and that's how they all became friends. As the years pass by, D&D, it becomes the language they all share. It's how they problem solve, it's how they bond. Even Nancy drifts into their world sometimes. Castle Byers gets built. Birthdays get celebrated around dice and rulebooks. This isn't just a game night, it's a support system. Then the comic jumps forward to after Will is rescued, and this is where it hits hard. Mike is trying to design a new campaign, but he can't, because the last time they played in the game, Will the Wise died. And in real life, Will almost died too. Suddenly, the fantasy feels dangerous instead of safe. D&D had stopped being an escape for them and started reflecting their trauma. So that's when Nancy stepped in and reminded Mike that while things can never go back to normal, doesn't mean they have to always be bad now. They'll just move forward differently. And that helped Mike realize that he just needs to do what they have always done. So he rewrites the story to not just revolve around Will this time. Instead, he makes it about all of them doing it together, like they always have. And that's why every time something impossible happens later in the show, they don't freeze, they name it. They map it, they fight it like a campaign. Because Dungeons & Dragons didn't just teach them how to imagine monsters, it taught them how to survive them. The Russians were way more dangerous on paper. The Russians were way more dangerous on paper.
So, if you only go by show, the Russians in Stranger Things, they feel almost comical. They're powerful, sure, but not exactly smart.
Season 3 frames their entire operation as brute force. Build a giant machine under a mall, crank it to 11, no pun intended, and then try to rip open reality like it's a stuck door. And that's basically it.
They don't study the Upside Down, they don't really understand it, they just keep blasting energy at it and hoping something gives. Well, the audience sees that there are Russian spies interested in the Upside Down, and that there's even a prison housing a Demogorgon. Not much of their operation is explored, and what is explored can hardly be called impressive. The comics, though, take a very different approach. In Stranger Things Kamchatka, the Russians aren't just trying to force their way in, they're trying to learn the rules, and that single shift makes them infinitely more dangerous. Instead of one massive machine, their focus is on hybrid science, biological, mechanical, psychological. They kidnap a scientist with experience in telekinesis and mind control, not to reopen a gate, but to understand how the Upside Down actually functions. Apparently, the scientist in question has already designed a device to harness this so-called telekinetic power, and they plan to explore its potential. The Russians pretty much had their own version of Brenner. And that's the key difference here. In the comics, the Upside Down isn't just treated like a place by the Russians, it's treated like a living system. The Russians dissect Demogorgon anatomy. They observe behavior patterns. They study how the environment reacts to stimuli. The implication is unsettling. They believe the Upside Down has its own biology. And if you understand that biology, you don't need to punch holes in reality anymore. You can communicate with it, control it, maybe even merge with it. It just completely reframes the threat. In the show, the Russians are reckless and impatient, and their plans are unstable, and they drink vodka. Their failures feel inevitable. You're never really worried they'll win, only that they'll cause collateral damage before they lose. In the comics, they're patient, methodical, disturbingly informed. Their goal isn't access, it's integration. And once you see it that way, the stakes stop being local. This isn't just about Hawkins or one gate or one monster. It becomes a global arms race over an entirely new form of life, which honestly makes the show's version feel less like a missed opportunity and more like a threat we were lucky didn't go further. So, after seeing all of these, it's hard not to look at the show a little differently. So I'll ask you, which difference do you think changes the story most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit all of the buttons, subscribe, watch some more videos. We have fun around here. But thanks for watching, commenting, have a good one, and bye-bye!